So welcome everyone to the Reclaiming the People's Money System with Howard Switzer from the Banking and Monetary Reform Committee. Go
Hi,
ahead, Howard.
everybody. Happy to be here. Happy to be talking about the money and glad to see some familiar faces. My co-chair, Rita Jacobs, is here, and Steve Schoen, member of the Monetary Committee. And we're here to talk about the money. Wait, am I late? No, you're not late. You're just in time. All right, good. Are you agreeing? Yeah, can't you see I got a green hat on? I'm wearing green, being seen. Yeah, well, you sure are. So we're gonna talk all about the money. What's your name? My name, Moneta. Wow, that's the Roman goddess of money. You know, can you tell us all about the money? Do I look like a goddess? Wait, no, we're supposed to be nonviolent here. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I got carried away there for a minute. All right, well, very good. Are you interested in money? Oh yeah, I love it. Do you know where it comes from? The cash register? No. I mean, where it originates, who creates it? I don't know, government? We're going to learn all about that. Why don't you go take your seat? Okay, bye everybody. Oh, it's kind of hot in here, don't you think? No, I don't think so. Anyway, just go sit down and relax. Okay, bye. All right. Thank you, Rita, for making that puppet. She spent a lot of hours on that. And I would like to do that poll as soon as possible, Lisa, if that's possible. And if you happen to have it up. In the meantime, I have a bunch of links I want to put in the chat also.
Let me see if I can get the poll going. I'm putting the first question in the chat there for people to think about. And that can be the first prompt, and I'll work on seeing if we can post it as a poll. But go ahead and respond to the chat. Yes or no answers are what we're looking for here. And Howard's going to add more to the chat as we go.
You're going to do it in the chat?
For now, and then I'll see if I can get them set up as a poll.
Oh, okay. I'll hold off on putting those links in then. You know what? I think this is going to take too long to do it this way. I was hoping the poll would be kind of a thing everybody did at once, and then you could see all of the results all at once together, and just to gauge people's knowledge about the money. Yeah, no, I think doing it in the chat will be a little difficult, so we're going to move on from that. It's just a few questions about, you know, who creates the money and stuff like that. Here are some links that I wanted to share before I forget about it. And it's websites, it's some articles, and a couple of videos. And they range the area that we're going to be talking about. And the first thing I want to do is start my PowerPoint. And I wonder, I see some candidates here. Jason Call, and who else? Jasmine. Jasmine's a candidate, right?
Yes, hello.
And are there some others here? Anyway, good looking group. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. And we'll begin talking about the money. And I'll have to do this and this. And so here we are, reclaiming the people's money system, funding the solutions for climate, justice, and democracy. And that's all about greening of the dollar, really. So, but I want to just cover some basic things about money that, because there's not a real lot of knowledge about the history of money. It's not really taught in school or anything. So, and it's an ancient innovation, a human innovation that's older than the wheel. And it was originated by natives who felt that they owed the Earth Mother a debt for their life. And so everything that they took from the earth, they would do a symbolic payment back for that. In fact, they would usually pay for it in advance. I work with a surveyor who does a prayer and pays with tobacco before he goes to cut the limbs and of the trees and stuff out of the way to take his shots. And so it was an early thing that was a payment system to pay a debt, basically. And that eventually evolved into using it for trade. It was a representation of value and became a social technology embodied in law or custom as an unconditional payment system. In other words, you could, everybody accepted it. It was an agreement on what was to be used to represent that value in the exchange of goods and services. So there was usually a specific thing that they wanted to identify as money. The dollar sign that you see up at the top there, I just wanted to point out, that's ancient also. That's the shaft of Asclepius, the serpent and the staff, which was a medical symbol also, see, because the temples, early on, people would bring their wealth to the temples to be healed or to pray for good crops so they didn't starve to death and stuff like that. And so it was all very connected. Money has these typical characteristics that the money that we use, we talk about, is it's a means of exchange and it's a unit of account. In other words, we keep track with it, and it's a store of value. In other words, we can store that money and save it up and accumulate it. And I highlighted that because that's an issue in itself. When money's a store of value, it can be accumulated. And so there's two roles that money plays. One is as an exchange medium for facilitating economic activity, and the other is it's an instrument of power, capable of dominating the market if you accumulate enough of it. In fact, you could buy a government, dominate an industry, whatever, if you get enough of it. And it's often referred to as the hidden hand because, you don't really see it operating. It's behind the scenes a lot of times, controlling the market, controlling an industry. There's, bankers sitting on the boards of those corporations. And so it's part of a system. It's a money system. And since the dawn of times, monetary systems have been shaping the flows of human activity in every realm of endeavor, food production, education, health, business, etc., by determining how we value, apply, and exchange our creativity and the fruits of our labor. It is for this reason the most influential of all human-made systems. And we're going to explore some of those influences here too. Warning, this is a Federal Reserve note. It has physical and psychological consequences. The use of this product may cause apathy, laziness, selfishness, ignorance, loss of identity, greed, gluttony, a false sense of empowerment, absence of individuality, self-centeredness, manipulative behavior, superficial values, lack of spirituality, environmental destruction, racial tension, murder, war, and impoverishment for others. Continuous and excessive use could render a permanent state of indifference to the welfare of those around you. Use at your own risk. This is a powerful statement. It's talking about both the physical and psychological consequences of our monetary system. And of course, we see all these things in it, right? You can see all of these things happening in society. The US, unlike most developed nations, is the only country in the world where you can go bankrupt because of medical bills. Housing in the US is right now, it's just a huge issue because you know what's going on. The big hedge funds have bought up a bunch of housing. So what we got going on right now is the median price of a house has gone up 41%. The median rent cost have gone up 34% and climbing. But income has only increased 9% at best, if at all. And so you see, we got a big problem. It's leaving people out of homes. And so we've got an increasing homeless population. But we've got 16 million empty homes and only 600,000 homeless people. 16 million homes empty. Why are they empty? Well, and where's all the money? Well, there's plenty of money because, I mean, just in the last 15 years, they created 9 trillion. And just 1 year, they created 2.2 trillion in new money. And where does all that money go? I mean, it seems like there would be plenty of money for housing. Yeah. Can you close the door? I'm in the middle of something. Sorry. And so where does it go? Well, first of all, we're talking about big numbers. When we talk about trillion, you know, have you ever tried to get your mind around that number of what a trillion is? You know, $1 million will fit in a suitcase. 100 million is a pallet full. 1 billion is 8 pallets. And 1 trillion is a football field of pallets double high. It's a ridiculous amount. Where does it all go? It's all going not to the productive economy where we all work and live, because there's not that much investment left to end because we're reaching planetary limits, right? We're running out of stuff that it can do. And so they're investing in what they call the speculative economy. That's the stock market and all that business. It's making money off of money. It's not producing anything. It's inflating asset prices and everything just to make more wealth for themselves, more claims on wealth, I should say. Money is a claim on wealth. And so you end up with this situation because all money is created as debt. So you end up with a massive amount of debt and not very much money. There's about 3.5 times, actually it's about 4.5 times now. This is a chart from 2019 showing these figures here, but I put the current figures up here, 93 trillion and 20.8 trillion. This is the total debt, public and private, you know, business, household, all of it. And this is all the money right here. So you see, there's not nearly enough money to pay off that debt. So what's that debt about? Well, the Bible tells us it's the rich rule over the poor and the borrower is the slave of the lender. And that is exactly what's going on. Now, this is the United States picture, but the global picture is very much the same. The global debt's 305 trillion now, and the global money supply is about 85 trillion, right? So the debt is always bigger in this system because you can't pay off debt with debt, right? All you do is get more debt. So there you go. That's what we got going on. And it's running up against this exponential curve. And of course, you see these exponential curves in a lot of things, right? It's pollution, it's population, it's bank issued money. It's a lot of things on that exponential curve. Anything that's increasing at a percentage rate is on an exponential curve. And that's a problem because we have a linear materials economy. It's not exponential. It can't be exponential. It is linear and finite, hooked up to an exponential finance system. So right away, we start running into problems. And those problems are the planetary limits, the planetary boundaries. And we know, Stockholm Exchange did a study, and that's where this diagram comes from. Just looking at where we've gone past the safe level of boundary and the things that are fast approaching that boundary. And this is what Kate Raworth, another economist, a rebel economist, who came up with this idea about donut economics. Looking at their diagram, she saw the limits going past here. Well, those are the things we want to draw back into the donut here, right? But then there's the shortfall in the middle. We don't want people falling into the middle, and we don't want to go there either, because that's, less food, less health, education, all that stuff. So we want everybody to be in the green of the donut. Well, this is a nice idea for fiscal spending, for city councils and state legislatures to analyze their public policy and let it guide. And so she's been getting towns in England to adopt these ideas. I did a program, I can't remember if it was last year's A&M or not, where I did a whole thing on money and didn't mention capitalism. Well, I'm going to correct that now, because capitalism is kind of an important part of the story, isn't it? So what is capitalism? The typical idea of capitalism is that, it was making stuff and selling stuff, and that was capitalism. But that's not really capitalism. That's free enterprise. That's just making stuff and pursuing your skills, making stuff, doing, and selling it. That's all kind of like free enterprise. What's capitalism? Well, capitalism is a money system that the capitalists, the money people, started. Capitalism emerged around in the 1600s. And actually before that, it was forming. And of course, it wasn't called capitalism until much later. But that's what it was. It was a debt money system, because they would lend money to countries. The wealthy money changers of back then, they had massive amounts of gold, massive amounts of wealth. And so they could lend money to countries that were going to war, because they couldn't afford, to provision their army, and they would borrow money and go into debt to these guys. Well, then when it come time to collect on the debt, especially if you were the loser, you couldn't pay. And so consequently, they would say, well, that's okay. We'll take over your monetary system, and because you obviously haven't done a good job of it. And so we will control your money system, and we will issue all the money. And they issued all the money as debt, right? Interest-bearing debt. And that's been going on for over 300 years now. And so it's an essential feature of capitalism's awesome power, right? Because you can buy the means, you can buy all the resources, you can buy the labor, you can buy the press to make it all look like you're doing good and you're helping everybody. You can buy propaganda out the wazoo. You can buy the government to protect your operations from anybody who might not like it, etc. Right? So money is power. And it is privately owned banks who create and allocate the money. And it's a system, it's an industry that's dominated by a few at the very top. BlackRock owns all the big banks, right? All of them. And all that money is issued as interest-bearing debt for profit, which is usury. It's abuse of monetary authority for profit is usury. There used to be laws against it. Religions used to ban it. It was horrible. Dante called it an extraordinarily efficient form of violence by which one does the most damage with the least effort. In other words, it was recognized a long time ago as being damaging to society, even the progenitor of the 7 deadly sins, you know, the greed and whatever, eating too much, etc. Anyway, we have plenty of that going on, right? But it's also, as I had mentioned earlier, a parasite on the back of free enterprise. So free enterprise is what people trying to do stuff, trying to pursue their livelihoods. But the capitalism is a debt parasite on the back of that, because in order to get money to do your business, you're probably going to have a bank loan. To buy a house, you're going to have a bank loan. So everybody's hooked up to this debt money system, and it's extracting the value out of everything we do. And you're going to see even more so how the effects that it has on not only our just physical livelihood, but also the psychological impacts. Now, everyone is made dependent on the banking system. And money, of course, we have lots of corruption. What runs corruption? Money. That's what corruption is, basically. It's money buying influence. And that's what makes money the governing factor, because nothing happens without it. It is the governing factor, and it has been for a long time. The ancient Greeks recognized that if you don't have publicly issued money, you have privately issued money. Well, if you want a democracy, you got to have publicly issued money, because otherwise you don't get to make the decisions. Those who have the money decide what happens and what doesn't happen. So it's very important, and a power that has been so covered in mystery, de-emphasized in school. Still today, economists will say, oh, this is all silly, this is nonsense, you know, you don't know what you're talking about. But Lord Acton, historian, he has that famous quote, you know, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. He was talking about money when he said power corrupts. Lots of money. But absolute power was the power to create that money. That corrupts absolutely. And that's what we've got going on. It's, like I said, for the last 300 years. And it's an issue that's swept down through the centuries, which will have to be fought sooner or later, is the people versus the banks, is what Lord Acton pointed out. And of course, lots of others have pointed the same thing out. The Pujo Committee in 1912 proved that business about how money controls everything, because they did an investigation and did a mapping of the network of ownership in this country in 1912. And what they discovered was J.P. Morgan and Company, with Rockefeller being his biggest depositor, they controlled every industry in the country. Every industry. They dominated every industry through the money system. But what are the consequences of wealth and power concentration? We can probably make a long list of that, right? We have as Louis Brandeis said, we can have democracy in this country, or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both, as I was just pointing out. So it destroys democracy to have a debt money system with oligarchs ruling, right? How can you have a good system that way? And it raises prices. Now, it raises prices in multiple ways. One is interest. And that's the big one, because everything along the way, from raw materials to the processing of those raw materials, to the manufacturing, the shipping, the manufacturing of the product, the distribution of the product, the retailing of the product, there's interest all along the way because all of those businesses doing that were using borrowed money. And so they had to cover their interest costs in the price of what they're selling. And so by the time it gets to us, it's nearly 50% of the cost of everything, all the goods and services we buy. Now, that is in the general economy, right? Corporate economy. It also lowers wages. Well, we know that when you have big power like that, you can keep the wages flat while you make a lot of money. And they've been using their power to do that, because if you have that kind of power, you can dictate public policy, and they've been doing that. It restricts workers' power. And of course, they've been trying to squash unions for a long time, and unions have gone down terribly in the last 20 years. But we're starting to see, you know, some rabble rousing going on now, which is really good to see. Everybody's starting to stand up for themselves against this system. And it also undermines small businesses and community well-being. You know, small businesses are the innovators. They hire most of the people. They're really the wealth engine of the country. And it depresses business dynamism, this debt load that's on top of it all. And that undermines innovation. And it also reinforces racial inequity, because they intentionally go after, you know, the poorest people have the least amount of power, and so they're the ones to exploit the easiest, and so they do. And I've got something down here on that won't go away, and so it helps anyway. It is a disaster, right? I mean, whether they talk disaster capitalism, is what Naomi was calling it, I think. It's catastrophe capitalism, I think. I call it catastrophe. I like iterations.
Howard, could I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So you've answered a couple questions on the poll, but you haven't gotten into all of it yet. So I could post the poll if you want the attendees to answer the questions and see what people are thinking right now.
Got it. You got the automated thing together?
Yeah, so we can do that.
Yeah, sure. Let's do that. Do I stop share?
Yeah, I think, yeah, go ahead and stop sharing for a moment. So the poll is 13 questions. The 10 questions will come up first, and then we can start the last 3 after everyone finishes the first 10. So I'm going to launch the first 10 of the poll, and these are all yes/no questions, so it should be pretty quick and easy. So let's see, can everyone see that?
We just want to look at the general picture.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's going to show up in the recording, but we're doing a poll now with some general basic questions that we want attendees to look at, and Howard's going to be answering these questions throughout the presentation. And I know he's touched on a couple of them. And so there's a couple really easy questions in here, but some of them are a little trickier. So maybe everyone wants to click yes or no on each of these 10 questions. And then Howard will get an idea of what people have learned so far and what we still need to cover.
Cool.
We got a couple answers on the first question. And I know we had a few more in the chat earlier.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid. I think all the answers will be anonymous. So
yeah.
Your answers won't be tagged to your name. So you can put in anything that you think is right. If you're just guessing, that's welcome too. Yeah, you're encouraged to guess. It'll give Howard a general idea of what people are thinking, and you can skip things. I believe you can skip a question and just answer it. Answer the ones that you want to.
Yeah.
And just looking through the answers briefly,
here.
There's no mistakes. Number 7 is a really easy one. And we have all yes answers for number 7. But all the other questions have some debate, and there's lots of yes, no answers. So go ahead and put your answers down. Nothing's wrong. Some of them are divided evenly. So let's, I'm going to end the poll in just a moment here. Raise your hand if you need more time to finish up. Okay, seeing no hands up, I'm going to go ahead and end the first poll, and I think we'll all be able to look at the results.
Maybe, is this going to go away?
Well, can you see the results showing
I
up?
can see the results now.
Okay, good. Do I need to scroll through it for you to see them all?
Just go over these before
Mhm.
we lose this. So I'm seeing that
You want to share? You share your screen, Howard, and then you can talk through it. How about that?
Do what?
Can you share your screen?
Show my screen. I see. Yeah, I can
See if that'll work.
and that'll show the poll.
I believe it will. Let's see if it works.
All right, cool. And the poll there. All right. So everybody see the poll?
Well, we can just see your screen that you were showing before with the study. It might be the case that we can all see the poll in our own screens, perhaps.
Well, anyway, I can just narrate it.
Yeah, narrate. That's good.
The first question, we're about 50-50, 46-54 actually, on whether or not the American Revolution was fought over the right to create money. Well, according to Ben Franklin and Thomas Paine and a few others, it was the money that was the biggest issue. But it was, again, hidden because what had happened was the colonies were very successful in creating their own money. And for a long time, they tried everything, trying to figure out money systems. It was a laboratory for monetary research, basically. And the colonies, they tried everything, tobacco, even wampum, they tried everything. And they ended up on paper money. Massachusetts was the first one, issued paper money, and bam, it worked. Everything was circulating. People were paying their debts. They were getting work done, hiring people. Everything was going good. It created prosperity, and the other states copied it. And England noticed after they had been enjoying this prosperity for a little while, and they called Franklin over on the carpet, the House of Lords, and asked him, why, what's going on over there, and why is everything so prosperous? And he said, well, we've got these money systems. We're using paper money, and it works very well. And they said, oh, great, okay. So they outlawed it, right? It was an act of war to print money in the colonies after that, after they outlawed it. And of course, some of the colonies kept doing it. So the British sent troops to keep that stuff from happening. And then, of course, they wanted to tax things and all these other stuff because they wanted all the wealth to be going over to England. They didn't want people living here to be enjoying any wealth. They were just supposed to be shipping it over to them. And so when they outlawed it, it plunged the country into a deep depression. And the revolution didn't happen for about 10 years after that. But they had been living in depression for so long, they just said, we've had enough of this. And so, bam, revolution happened. So does the government print and mint the currency? Yes, they do. They print and mint the currency. But the currency, you see, is a representative of money. It's not money. It's a representative of money. And what the government does is they print the currency and sell it to the banks for their customers' cash needs. You know, so the money's created electronically by the banks. And when somebody wants to withdraw from their electronic deposit bank account, in cash, then that cash is issued. And so that's how that works. Does the government create the money? No, just the currency. They print the currency, but they don't create the money, even though the Constitution says only Congress has the power to create the money. And so that's the issue that greening the dollar addresses, the unconstitutional nature of our monetary system. Do banks lend existing money? Some banks might lend existing money. Those are called deposit banks. But most of the banks we deal with every day, most of them are banks of issue, and they create money. They don't lend any existing money. In fact, lending existing money is very rarely happens these days because there's just not enough of it. Do banks have a monopoly on creating money? Yes, they do. They have a private monopoly on it. And of course, that monopoly is owned way up at the top by BlackRock. Is money an efficient means of exchange? Well, you decide, but it's a lot, it actually is a pretty efficient means, because barter, of course, where you're trading, commodity for commodity, and they might not be the same commodity. And so that gets very complicated. Money makes it easy. And so it's kind of an efficient system. Is money an instrument of power? Yes, it is. Everybody knows that, right? There's places you can't go because you don't have the money. And it's not like you couldn't walk in. It's just that you're not welcome. And is the Fed a government agency? Yes, I'm glad everyone by now understands that is not. And of course, they advertise for workers in the newspaper, right, to come work for the bank. It's not a government job. So do private banks own the Fed? Yes. JP Morgan, State Street, it shifts around a little bit, but there's usually about 3 that dominate it, and JP Morgan is always the biggest. And do you learn about the money system in school? No, most people no. And if you learned anything about money in school, it might have been at college level, and it might not have been accurate information. Anyway, we can take that poll down.
Okay. Now, do we want the second poll of the last 3 questions?
All right. I might note that the Nobel Prize for economics, which isn't really a Nobel Prize at all, and in fact, Nobel would probably roll over in his grave because of it, but it's the Riksbank, which is the first central bank, and it's the Swedish central bank that issues that prize. And they issued it to 3 economists this year, 3 economists who all 3 lie about how the system works. They all deny banks create money. They all say that it's the government creates the money and that banks just lend existing money. But that's what we want. That's what greening of the dollar wants to create, is the government issues the money for the public needs, not into speculation at the stock market, of course. And it would work much better for us.
Okay, so we have 3 more questions. I'm going to launch these, and then let's take your answers to the last 3 questions. And then we'll let Howard get back to his presentation, and hopefully we'll, Howard, you can tackle some of those comments that are coming up in the chat from our dissenting voices, and we'll have time for discussion too. So don't worry, if you are critical or have dissenting views, we will definitely have time to talk.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I can share the PowerPoint. And Yes, Michael Hudson. I enjoy Michael Hudson. He hasn't been influenced this research that much, but he is out there, you know, hammering on the issue a lot of times. So I really appreciate that. Divorced from over 5,000 years of our own, our own economic history and theory. That's right. And that's why this book is so good, because this is the monetary history. And this is a book that Michael Hudson would recommend to get the fundamentals of monetary systems. And because this is from it's the history, and took 11 years of research to put that together by Stevens Arlinga. So it's a good one. So are we done with the poll?
I think we might be done. I'm going to go ahead and end it unless anyone puts a hand up. Okay, these were probably a little quicker here. So I'm going to share the results of our final 3 questions. Looks like we got overwhelmingly yes answers for all of them, with 1 or 2 dissenters on no.
All right. Greenbacks were debt-free, publicly issued money. Yes, they were. And of course, but you know, a lot of times people will call any green money greenbacks, right? But it's not really they were not really greenbacks. They're Federal Reserve notes, unless it says it's US money on it. And does money influence public policy? Yes, indeed. And we all know that, don't we? Through lobbying and all of that kind of stuff. And does it matter how money is created? Yes, yes, indeed. I think so. We can all agree on that. All right, you can take that poll down. And I'm going to share those links that I promised, that I hadn't put them up before. And then
okay, we have lots of links from Howard here in the chat. And I know people can copy that and paste it over in a Word document. So if you want to save this for after the event, please make sure to do that at the bottom of the chat.
I think you can also save the whole chat if you want.
Yeah, you can do that at the bottom.
Buttons.
And for those who are watching the recording, hopefully Howard will make some sort of page on the Banking and Monetary Reform Committee website that has some of these resources. That would be wonderful.
Yes. Yeah, Greens for Monetary Reform is in there. And our newsletter that we publish each month goes up on that website too. All right, we can take that poll down. Or do I do it? I do it. It's my poll. Okay. All right. Now let's go back to the pictures here. And so I need to share screen again. Back to where we were. And so we were just talking about this, right? What do corporations have any influence on public policy? And here it is. The Princeton study did a 5-year study from 2009 to 2014, and where 200 most politically active companies, and of course they're all owned by banks with bankers sitting on their boards, they spent $5.8 billion influencing government over those 5 years, but they got back $4.4 trillion in subsidies and benefits. That's 758 times their investment back. And in fact, banks learned long ago, as far back as the 1600s, that by far their most profitable investments were in governments, because they could take governments to war, which was very profitable for them. They could even fund both sides of the war and decide who gets to win, even by funding them and not funding the other. And so they could really had a tremendous amount of ability to manipulate geopolitics. And using war debt, like I said, they gradually got control of governments' purse strings. And they set up a central bank in each country. As I said, Riksbank in Sweden, that was the first one in 1880s, I think, or something like that. And then they went ahead and set them up. And the US didn't get theirs until 1913. It took a little political battle to get it, but they finally got it using some legislative sleight of hand. And so it's a system that centralizes things. We've noticed that, right? There are fewer and fewer media corporations, fewer and fewer food corporations, fewer and fewer energy corporations, right? More pollution, less security too, because it's centralized. Centralized food production. Now it's even getting worse. They're wanting to get rid of the farmers so they can sell us manufactured food. And that is extremely crazy and worrisome, an issue that we've got to pay attention to. It's a centralizing system. It centralizes population because it's chased people off of the land, producing, sustenance farmers in a lot of these third world countries and stuff. And it's sent these massive population influxes around cities so that the big corporations could then use the land to grow their crops. So we mentioned earlier, there's the kinds of money. We got currency over here, and then the account money, which is the electronically created money, and that's where all the money gets created, basically. The coins are actual money too. We call it actual money because it was sold at face value by the government. So the government gets some profit off of that, but they don't off of the bills. And we'll take a look at that. The coins cost about 7 cents a piece to make, and different denominations and slightly more or less. That's just an average. Pennies cost more than they're worth, but the government makes 300,000 or 300 million rather in profit on that, and just the coins every year. But they don't make anything off of the bills because they sell the bills at the cost of production, which is about 13 cents on average a piece per bill. And they sell them by the pallet to the banks. And then the banks, when they issue that money, they're getting the seniority, they're getting that benefit. And of course, it's way more than 300 million. So that's another way that they're costing us. I think every American in this system owes, their part of it is like tens of thousands of dollars. Anyway, the account money is where most of the money in circulation is the electronic money. And then there's that small amount of cash that gets issued for people that want to use cash for stuff. And it's roughly 3%, but it varies. And I have a feeling right now it's even a smaller percentage because they've created so much money electronically the last couple of years. But when a loan is made, that debt consists of the principal and the interest. And if you've all had car loans, you know that the banks get the interest first. So when you start making your payments, you notice that most of it is for interest and a little bit towards the principal. And gradually, as the interest gets paid, more and more gets paid on the principal. Well, when a principal is paid, when you take out the loan, that principal is deposited in your account, right? So numbers go up. And when you make a payment, those numbers come back down. That's money destroyed. So money is created and destroyed by the bank system. But the interest, which is the bank's profit, where does that come from? That's got to come from the principal of another loan. And that is the systemic growth imperative of the system, trying to pay the interest on your loan so you don't lose all your stuff, right? So you don't lose your collateral. And so that is the big engine that drives constant growth. And of course, big corporations, when they, they borrow money too and have to pay that interest, make that interest payment. So they're driving hard and screwing their workers and everything to try and make enough money to pay that interest to the bank. All those corporations, healthcare, big ag, big pharma, those are profit centers for the banks. So we have, this is just the stock market for, well over 100 years of the stock market. It's up and down, all going along there. But what I wanted to call your attention to was those gray bands that you see there, vertical gray bands. And what they represent are the recessions and depressions that have happened. So the bankers make a lot of money when they make loans at interest, and they're collecting interest, and that interest is often compounded, as we know in home mortgages, how we pay 3 times the amount of the loan back. Student debt, a lot of students now are owing as much as they did, and they've been paying for 20 years. So it's extremely unjust and ridiculous. Well, the bankers make money on that end, but when a recession happens and the banks, have a run on the banks and they have to close the banks and they're not lending any money, the system crashes. Well, what happens then? People default on their loans, and the collateral is picked up for pennies on the dollar by the wealthy. So they're making money on coming and going, right? So if you're up in a position to do that, and of course the hedge funds have been buying up housing like crazy, and that's why we got 16 million empty houses. They'll have rent charge on it $4,000, and it's not occupied, and they won't lower the rent to get it occupied. Why? Because they're trying to attract investors. If they lower the rent price, their investment isn't as big and attractive to their investors. So they're inflating everything to attract investors. Look at all this money you can make when people pay their rent. It's a nutty thing. You really got to watch out for these usurers, as Dante would call them. The problem with the modern economy is not the failure of knowledge of economics, but it's the failure of the knowledge of history. And so that's why I was pointing out that book, as Stevens Arlinga says, the money's more of a question of power than it is economics. And so it behooves us to learn about it. Our solution, now there's a number of solutions, but as a national party seeking national public policy, it makes sense that we do greening of the dollar the way we are. But oh yeah, you mentioned some history. I've already kind of covered the history, how the Greeks recognized long ago that democracy kind of depended on controlling the money, and that the revolution was fought for the continental currency was a public money, actually, and that's what funded the revolution. And the British, in order to lower the value of it, had ships in New York Harbor printing counterfeit continentals by the millions. And Washington's men would often capture a wagon load of continentals going to loyalists who would spend it into the economy to crash the value of the continental. But it took 5.5 years for it to get low enough, and by then, at that point, we were winning the war and won it militarily, but we lost it monetarily. As Salvador Allende would say after his revolution 200 years later, we've won the revolution, but we didn't win the power. And the power, of course, is the money system. So if you win your revolution and you don't win the money power, you really haven't won your revolution. And so greenbacks was the only public money since the founding of the nation, after the revolution, is the only public, was the public money system, the only public money system that we had. And unfortunately, they didn't ban the private banks from creating money too. So the greenbacks were a real boon to the economy, even during the war. When they were issued, his economic advisor described the economy. He says, basically, it was a cash economy. And when the greenback came into it, people started paying off their debts. Businesses weren't having to depend on debt so much anymore. And the bankers hated it. Bankers hated it. And so bankers got Congress to say, okay, you can turn your greenbacks in and get gold. And nobody did it because the greenbacks were an efficient exchange mechanism that everybody really liked. And so it worked really well so the banks, what they did was they started creating $1.50 for every one greenback, dollars worth of greenback, and created inflation to quell the benefits from that public money system. So that's why it's important that when we have a public money system, part of our proposal is to stop the banking system from creating money, and they just become the intermediaries that the Nobel laureates said it was, right? That banks were just intermediaries, they weren't creators. And so that's what they should be, is just intermediaries. And they would become, and of course they would shrink quite a bit. We would have community banks again, and they would just be another little business on the street that people took their receipts to every day and had them locked up safely. And of course, after the greenbacks, and the bankers squashed them, the movements of the late 19th century were all about more greenbacks. And at the top of almost every platform, it was, we want a public money system and we want the banks out of it. Don't want the banks to have anything to do with it. And Coxey's Army was about that. That was the biggest protest the Capitol had seen to that date. And then of course, we got the Fed in 1913, and it was supposed to solve the banking crisis, right? But the banking crisis, as you saw in those gray bands, they continued along just fine, crashing the economy, building it up and crashing it again, and transferring wealth to the capitalists. Well, after the 29 crash, which was a big one, a bunch of economists lost a bunch of money and they got pretty ticked off. And so they said, okay, that's enough of that. We need a public money system. And so they came up with this plan, which was to make the banks, just like we want in the greening of the dollar, ban the banks from creating money, and they just become 100% reserve banks. In other words, there's no reserve really. They just can only lend existing money. And then the Federal Reserve banks would be nationalized and put into the Treasury. They would be controlled by the Treasury then. And the government, only the government would create the money. And of course, it would be creating money for public need, not for speculation on Wall Street. And so there was in 1999, somebody even proposed a monetary Financial Security Act. And I'm not sure, I can't remember now how it differed from the Need Act, but the Need Act was an improvement. And it was also an improvement on the Chicago plan in terms of its details. It spent 3 years in Legislative Legal Counsel being vetted to make sure that it complied with law. And of course, it was changing the law, but there's certain specific things you have to do to make that legal. And so that was so we had got the American Monetary Reform Act, which is an update of the Need Act, but we have no sponsors for it at this point. And this is all what the greening of the dollar is based on. It's the same thing. It's actually it's public money system that's been trying to break out of the chains for hundreds of years now. And we even had it put in the Constitution, and yet they ignored it. Hamilton talked Congress into giving the money authority to his friend's bank, and the rest is history. There was one public bank, right? And of course, this was shortly after we got the central bank. And of course, the farmers were really ticked off because they were the ones getting screwed by the bankers, as always, and still are. And so in North Dakota, they managed to pull off establishing a public bank back then. This would be very hard to do today, but people are trying. But, you know, when you get into the existing politics, and of course, this bank has been corrupted by the existing politics, it no longer helps the farmers, you know, it helps the oil industry, you know, so the Bank of North Dakota is not really, you know, it's just a reflection of the current politics. But the proposal by the Public Banking Institute and stuff of to do something like through postal banks. Post offices used to be banks also up until the 60s. And they should be again, because that would be a good public banking system where you could do banking without having to deal with a big corporation. And of course, with a public money system, those big corporations are going to start shrinking. But Herman Daly and others have noted that it's not that we need public banks to solve the problem. What we need is public money. So he said, nationalize the money, not the banks. You know, let the banks, it's a business. So government shouldn't be run like a business, and it shouldn't be running businesses. You know, it's government, and it should be governing to make sure that it's fair for everybody. And so that's where we're at on that. Now, local currencies. Now, this is something, you know, when we talk about a monetary system, I'm talking about a national monetary system where it's national money. But a lot of people, and I'm sure many of Greens here, noting that we really need to be issuing the money at the local level where the need really is. You know, I mean, your local government is they know what the local needs are. And of course, they're a bit corrupt now, but the nice thing about changing the money, it also changes the psychology, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But local currencies are, most of them are network currencies. And so you have to create and maintain a network, and you can only buy within that network, right? So you can see that there's a big disadvantage there for that kind of a system, as opposed to a local government issuing the currency and saying, yeah, you can pay your taxes on it. And we're funding all kinds of projects in town here, and that with that tax money circulating. Well, this guy was a merchant economist. In other words, he was just a merchant, but he started studying money because he was getting screwed. And so he did a wonderful research on this and started the Free Economy School, which became a movement for freeing the land and freeing the money in Europe for a time. And it was squashed, of course, by the governments, and he was arrested, thrown in jail for a while. But they let him out because, you know, he was just trying to make sure everybody got a square deal. Well, his idea was that money should lose value just like the stuff we buy with it. That it's unnatural, and of course Aristotle pointed that out too, for money to keep growing when nothing else can keep growing. it can only grow to a point and then has to die or shrink or something, like a slime mold. So he says money should be hooked up to the products, and it should go down in value over time. And so that was his proposal. Well, there were communities in Germany and Austria that tried it. And it was so successful, the central banks and government shut them down because they were just too successful. And the bankers didn't like it because it cut them out of the loop. The beauty of that, it's similar to the system that was in Egypt and even Mesopotamia before usury came along, where people would bring their grain to the granary and they would scratch the amount and the date on it. Well, of course, grain over time loses its value, right? And so basically it was a demurrage, what they call a demurrage system, where the value goes down at a slow rate. And so this created legendary prosperity in Egypt for like 3,000 years. And then it happened again in the high Middle Ages for about 250 years or so, because the lords who were busy, being rich and having wars with their relatives and things, they would issue money to the people. Gold was the money that they used in their trade between countries and between, jurisdiction, between fiefdoms, etc. But they would issue money for the people, and then they would, that money would go down in value over the year, and then it would get reissued and go down. Well, during that time, during that 250 years, the people prospered. They prospered so much that that's when all of those big cathedrals were built. They built 1,000 great cathedrals, and they were like little towns doing it. They would only have like seating for 150 in the cathedral, but there was only 50 people in town, So what they were doing was thinking of the future. They were building for the future, that people would come and spend money in their local economy, and it worked. It's still working today. But after that 250 years and war debt bore down on those lords, and they handed their monetary system over to the money changers, and they eliminated that monetary system and plunged Europe into such a deep depression that in a few years later, the plague started because people were living in such squalor. And that, even though the population had doubled during that time, the population halved during the plague.
Howard, I'm going to have to give Sal a 5 to 10 minute ending time here. And how can we receive copy of your PowerPoint? Will you be posting it online?
Yeah.
And then how can this discussion continue for those who want to continue it? Do we have a server or some other place where people can participate? And then do you want to entertain any questions in the last few minutes?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't even paying attention to the time. I should have had you cut me off about at 45 minutes or something, or 40 minutes. How much more time do we have?
Well, okay. So first question is, how can people see the presentation, the PowerPoint afterwards?
How can I do that? Is there a way for me to?
You can share it with
put it on the national committee list.
Yeah, on the Banking and Monetary Reform Committee, could have gone there.
I can do that. And also, you're welcome to come to our meetings if you'd like sometime. Just drop me an email, and we're always happy to have people come and talk about the money.
And Howard, can you share your email in the chat, or tell me and I'll type it in for you?
I'll put my email in the chat.
Perfect.
Howard.
So the Banking and Monetary Reform Committee has regular meetings, and you can find that committee on the Green Party website. And it's linked in the description for this workshop.
All right.
They can send email to the committee. It's just bmrc@gp.org.
I'll type that in. Okay, bmrc@gp.org.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, we will make sure everyone hears that. So everyone on the recording, it's BMRC for Banking and Monetary Reform Committee, bmrc@gp.org. So that's a great place to get more info, ask questions. What about continuing this discussion? Will there be any forum for that, or is it mostly in the meetings?
You know, our meetings are every Thursday night from 9 to usually until about 11 o'clock Eastern time. And we were not going to hold a meeting tonight because of the A&M going on. However, maybe if people wanted to come and discuss things, we could do that at a meeting tonight. What do you think about that, Howard?
I think that's great. Yeah.
Okay.
And so how will people find the link to join that? Is it on the committee website?
Let's see. I would put that on. I don't have that link right now. And on the national list, or I can put it on. Could we put it on the chat?
Yeah, probably, yes.
And then those who are watching can email bmrc@gp.org to get the link to join the Thursday evening meetings.
Let's do that. Yeah, that'd be easier for me. And then because then I send it out to everybody.
Now, there's been a lot of questions in the chat, a lot of discussion.
I am so sorry I wasn't able to.
That's okay. You know, Howard, I think one of the biggest questions that comes up is how does a greening the dollar, how is it incompatible, or is it incompatible with MMT? Like, how do these theories relate and fit together?
They're two different things. Modern monetary theory is only dealing with fiscal issues, not the monetary system. They describe the monetary system kind of like your Nobel-winning economists do, so it's not really quite accurate in that regard. But the fiscal policy that they want is the fiscal policy we want too, a lot of it, you know. And so in that regard, I feel like we're on the same page. They also believe that sovereign money is the best way to fund the deficit. The difference is they think we already have sovereign money, and we're saying, no, the government has to create it to be sovereign money. And they use kind of like that economist semantics to get this idea that the government's creating the money, which is not accurate.
Great.
But that's the main difference. We want to change the system, they don't, right?
Okay, Noah's written MMT as a tactic, greening the dollar as a strategy. Would you agree with that?
Greening the dollar is a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, greening the dollar is a proposal for changing the system. And I would think that the strategy would be to push that forward and show and connect it up to showing people how the benefits of changing that system would be for their economy.
Yeah. Howard, I have the link for the Zoom. Shall I put that in the chat?
Okay, sure.
Okay, all righty. It's in there.
All right.
So anyway, we meet at 9 o'clock, and although we had decided not to have a regular meeting tonight, we certainly can be there if anybody wants to come and chat some more.
Yeah.
And I noticed Christopher over here has his hand up too.
Okay, Christopher. You had a question, Chris? Where'd you go?
Yes, sorry about that. My phone is lagging. Anyway, my question for you guys, or for you all, was regarding continued participation. So you had mentioned that we have the opportunity to to more or less silently join the committee. And I was wondering if, for example, the group had any, I guess, Discord server or anything like that was a means by which we could also continue, or if anyone here would mind. I'm the last group that I was in with Bill, his group. We started a Discord server. So I was just wondering if that is something that is pre-existing, or if that's something that maybe we could create voluntarily to help further the means of discussion amongst ourselves.
We do have a listserv that our committee uses, but and also I know of other forums where money is being discussed. But I like the idea of doing another one if there was some enthusiasm. But I think I don't know. What do you think, Mary and Rita, about our listserv? We could.
The listserv is primarily for members of the committee only.
Yeah, and we have some discussion on there, but if we had a lot, we might lose stuff that we if we had too many posts coming in. So yeah, setting up a Discord thing, Chris, that'd be a pretty cool idea.
Felina's mentioning that there's a Facebook group. Howard, is there already a Facebook group that people could join?
There's a Facebook. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, could you share the link to that, or just the name of it, or Felina, if you have it?
Yeah.
That might be the easiest way to just, get the conversation going around starting up a new platform, Christopher, perhaps.
All right. I think so.
So what's the Facebook group name called?
Banking and Monetary Committee. And I'm trying to get out of my slide. There it is.
Yeah, that's great.
My escape button wasn't working.
So look up Banking and Monetary Reform Committee on Facebook as a landing place for some folks if you want to join the conversation.
I know it would be ideal if we could have some sort of a non
Of course.
system that's not connected to any of the present social media systems that are
Right.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. That might just be a place to connect to set up something new.
Yeah. We could probably use some technological help in some of those areas. Did that link get posted? Oh,
I believe I
Yes.
found
oh my
it.
goodness, it's a shared screen. I see. Who shared that?
What
Did you share that screen, Rita?
screen?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the our Facebook page.
Okay.
Oh,
I put a link to what I think is the Facebook group there. It's gpus.bmrc under Facebook groups.
There it
So
is.
that looks like the right one. I see Howard's post at the top of that.
yes.
So, even if you're not wanting to participate on Facebook long term, it might be a place to just connect with people and help to get up another server that would be more private.
Yeah.
And especially for people who are watching the recording here, you can go to Facebook groups, gpus.bmrc for Banking and Monetary Reform Committee.
I'm sorry we didn't get as far as I'd hoped to talk about the psychological aspects of money, which are significant, and then more about local currencies and how we might pull something off like there to force the issue with the national currency.
Well, it sounds like this discussion will have to keep happening over on Facebook and eventually on a server. And if you're really interested, join the committee and you can get involved there. Sorry, we can't take all the questions because we are over time by 5 minutes and we don't want to hold people up.
I actually didn't have a question.
Thank you so much, everyone.
I just wanted to say that if anybody could help me out, I have to collect 100 signatures to be able to be one of the candidates for the election. If you could just go to my website and see if my thoughts, my policies align with yours, I just need 100 signatures. And so the goal is to get them during the convention this week. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Jasmine. Okay, sorry, we can't take any more questions. I'm going to thank Howard for presenting, thank everyone else for participating. And it's great to share this information and to get it out there. So thank you.
Bye-bye.